The courtroom carried a heavy, expectant silence that morning, the kind that makes every shuffle of paper sound like thunder. Judge Caprio scanned the docket calmly, unaware that a storm was about to walk through the door, until it did. A 19-year-old young woman strutted inside with the confidence of someone who had never been told no in her life. Designer coat, perfectly styled hair, expression sharpened with practiced boredom. She didn't look at the clerk, didn't acknowledge the officers, and didn't even break stride before dropping into her seat with a dramatic exhale that echoed through the room. Her arms crossed tightly, her chin lifted just enough to signal that she believed the entire judicial system was beneath her. A few spectators exchanged looks, sensing the temperature of the room shift. Caprio watched her quietly, noting the tension she tried to hide, the quick, restless bounce of her leg, the tiny tremor in her fingers when she reached to push her hair back, the way her eyes scanned the room not with curiosity but with calculation, as if searching for the quickest exit from consequences. She muttered under her breath, but loud enough for people to hear. "This is a waste of my dad's time. He shouldn't have to deal with this." A couple of people turned their heads. The clerk hesitated mid-sentence. Caprio gently closed the folder in front of him, his expression steady but sharpened by decades of reading human behavior. This wasn't going to be a simple case. It was the kind of moment where ego meets reality, and the courtroom becomes the stage for a lesson no one asked for but everyone needed to see. The young woman leaned back, folding her arms with deliberate arrogance, convinced that her father's influence placed her above every rule and expectation in the room. Spectators whispered, some with curiosity, others with a growing sense of disbelief at the display of entitlement unfolding before them. Caprio's calm gaze never wavered. He had seen this before, countless times, yet each case carried its own unique spark of tension. Her lips pressed together in a thin line, her eyes scanning the courtroom like a general surveying a battlefield, missing nothing but revealing more than she intended. Every subtle flicker of nervous energy betrayed the persona she had crafted, the invisible cracks beneath her flawless facade. The judge waited patiently, allowing the silence to stretch, letting her stew in the illusion that she controlled the moment. A soft cough from the back of the courtroom made her flinch just slightly, and she straightened, smoothing her coat and forcing a more defiant expression, one that said she would not yield. Her hand twitched toward her designer purse as if reaching for a shield she didn't need, and Caprio noticed the slight tremor in her fingers, evidence of a storm barely contained. This was more than attitude. It was fear masked as superiority, a desperate attempt to cling to control in a place designed to strip it away. The room waited, everyone sensing the impending collision between privilege and principle, the moment when pretense would meet reality in the quiet, deliberate manner only a courtroom could deliver. Caprio cleared his throat softly, his voice calm but firm, carrying the weight of decades spent guiding tempers and exposing truth. "Good morning," he began, his eyes locking briefly with the young woman's, not in challenge, but in quiet invitation, the kind that demanded honesty without raising his voice. She rolled her eyes subtly, a dismissive flick meant to assert dominance. But even in that small gesture, her hesitation betrayed her, a flicker of uncertainty she thought she could hide. The spectators leaned in imperceptibly, sensing the unspoken tension, the clash of authority versus entitlement. She shifted in her seat, tapping her designer heel lightly against the floor, her fingers tightening around the edge of the chair as if it were the only thing anchoring her to the moment. Caprio watched every micro-expression, every nervous glance toward the doorway, every subtle adjustment of her coat, and he knew the performance would crumble if he allowed the silence to speak. "You understand why you are here today?" he asked gently, yet there was an unmistakable gravity behind the words. She scoffed, looking away, brushing her hair from her face in a gesture both practiced and revealing, and muttered, almost to herself, "Of course, but this is ridiculous. They have no idea who my father is." A collective murmur rippled through the room, half amusement, half exasperation, while Caprio's expression softened slightly, as if he recognized not just the arrogance but the hidden pressure weighing on her young shoulders, the unseen burdens of a life where influence could shield yet never truly protect one from accountability. The courtroom seemed to hold its breath as Caprio leaned forward slightly, hands resting calmly on the desk, his eyes never leaving hers, a quiet anchor in the storm of her entitlement. She shifted again, crossing and uncrossing her legs, attempting to appear relaxed, but the subtle tremor in her jaw betrayed a tension she could not completely mask. "Do you think respect is something that is given because of wealth or status?" Caprio asked softly, each word deliberate, filling the space between them with a question that cut deeper than any accusation. She blinked, a fraction longer than normal, caught off guard by the unexpected challenge. The room watched in suspense, sensing that the usual rules of courtroom drama were being rewritten in this moment of quiet confrontation. Her fingers drummed lightly against her knee, a nervous rhythm hidden beneath the veneer of superiority. She began, hesitating, searching for the words that would protect her image, her reputation, her carefully cultivated persona. Caprio's expression remained patient, almost fatherly, letting the silence stretch just long enough for self-reflection to seep in. Spectators exchanged glances, leaning forward as if drawn into an invisible magnet, witnessing not just a clash of authority and privilege, but the first cracks in the armor of a young woman who had always assumed the world bent to her will. And somewhere beneath the rehearsed defiance, a flicker of vulnerability began to emerge, fragile but unmistakable, signaling the first step toward an unexpected transformation. A subtle shift occurred in the young woman's posture as Caprio's words settled over her like a gentle but unyielding current, forcing her to reckon with the room's gaze and her own defiance. Her arms, once tightly crossed, loosened slightly, and for a brief moment, her eyes darted down to the polished courtroom floor, revealing a hesitation she tried desperately to hide. The murmurs of the spectators faded into the background as Caprio continued to speak, not with anger, but with the quiet authority of someone who understood that true lessons were learned, not forced. "Sometimes the hardest battles we fight are not with others, but with ourselves," he said softly, letting the weight of his words fill the silence. She swallowed hard, the smirk fading, replaced by a flicker of uncertainty, as if the walls she had built around her arrogance were beginning to tremble. Her leg stopped its restless bounce, and the tremor in her fingers softened, though not completely, betraying a mixture of fear and awakening. For the first time, she seemed aware that entitlement alone could not shield her from consequence or moral truth. Caprio's gaze remained steady, patient, almost inviting her to find her own voice amidst the storm of expectation and privilege. Spectators leaned forward, sensing that the moment had shifted. What began as an exhibition of arrogance was quietly transforming into a subtle, yet profound, confrontation with reality, a lesson in humility that neither she nor anyone in the room would forget. Her eyes flicked back up to Caprio, meeting his gaze for a fraction longer than she intended, and she felt a strange mix of defiance and curiosity, a tug-of-war between the persona she had perfected and the person she had never fully confronted. The courtroom seemed suspended in that instant, every heartbeat echoing in the polished wood and muted murmurs of onlookers. She shifted in her seat, the rigid confidence she wore like armor now slightly loosening, fingers brushing against the edge of the table as if seeking some invisible anchor. I just don't see why this matters," she muttered, her voice quieter than before, laced with the vulnerability she had tried so hard to suppress. Caprio's expression softened, his calm eyes conveying both understanding and gentle authority, silently inviting her to step out of her own shadow. The judge didn't raise his voice or scold her. Instead, he allowed the silence to speak, letting the weight of accountability and conscience settle naturally. Spectators leaned forward, sensing a subtle shift, a crack in the armor of entitlement, a moment where genuine reflection might emerge. She had walked into the courtroom believing herself untouchable, wielding the influence of her father as a shield, but in Caprio's presence, she began to feel the undeniable pull of personal responsibility, the quiet power of integrity, and the first real pangs of humility. The lesson was beginning, not through reprimand or outrage, but through a measured, almost invisible challenge that demanded she confront herself in front of the world. She shifted again, this time more noticeably, the weight of the courtroom pressing down in a way her designer outfits had never prepared her for, and she realized the eyes of the spectators were no longer filled with awe or fear of her status, but quiet curiosity, expectation, and judgment. The smirk she had worn so carefully began to falter, replaced by a tension she could no longer fully conceal, her shoulders tightening as if bracing against an invisible force. Caprio's voice broke the silence, calm and deliberate, each word measured. "It's easy to speak without thinking when you believe the world owes you answers, but what do you owe in return?" The question hung in the air like a slow-moving current, tugging at the edges of her carefully constructed ego. Her hands trembled slightly as they rested on the table, a subtle betrayal of her inner conflict, and she forced her gaze elsewhere, unable to admit that she didn't know the answer. The room felt suspended, each spectator leaning forward, caught between fascination and empathy, sensing that a transformation was quietly underway. Her entitlement, once a shield, now felt fragile, a veneer easily cracked by the patient wisdom before her. Caprio did not press further, allowing her to wrestle with her own conscience, and in that moment, the young woman understood: control, influence, and wealth could not protect her from truth, and the real courtroom battle was internal, fought in silence, with the raw honesty she had so far avoided. Her eyes flickered toward the spectators again, noticing their expectant gazes, and she felt a strange awareness settle over her, a recognition that the room was no longer an audience for her defiance but witnesses to her awakening. The confident posture she had cultivated began to waver, her crossed arms loosening slightly as she struggled to maintain the mask of arrogance. Caprio leaned forward subtly, his hands folded calmly, voice gentle but insistent. "Privilege can give you comfort, but it cannot replace understanding, empathy, or accountability." The words sank in slowly, their weight pressing into her like a tide she could neither resist nor ignore. Her foot tapped once, then stopped, as if the rhythm of her defiance had been interrupted by an unfamiliar introspection. She opened her mouth to respond, then paused, realizing there were no clever lines or rehearsed quips that could truly answer the judge's quiet challenge. The courtroom remained silent, the air thick with anticipation, every observer sensing the internal battle she was now forced to confront. For the first time, she recognized that her status could shield her from punishment, but it could not shield her from truth, nor the subtle but undeniable call to grow, to see beyond herself, to confront the fear and insecurity she had buried beneath layers of entitlement. And in that quiet, charged moment, the first real crack in her facade appeared, fragile but unmistakable, signaling a shift the entire room felt deep in their bones. A trembling exhale escaped her lips as she realized the weight of every eye in the courtroom was no longer on her fashion, her family, or her status, but on the person she had been hiding behind layers of entitlement. Her fingers toyed nervously with the edge of the chair, betraying the storm of thoughts she was trying to suppress, while Caprio's gaze remained steady, patient, and quietly penetrating, a calm presence that seemed to invite honesty rather than demand it. "Understanding responsibility is not a punishment," he said softly. "It's the key to respect, and respect is earned, not inherited." The words hit her with an unexpected force, and for the first time, she felt the hollowness beneath her confidence, the weight of living in a world where appearances often overshadowed integrity. She swallowed, lips pressed together, feeling a rare vulnerability creep into her chest, an unfamiliar emotion that felt equal parts fear and awakening. Around her, spectators shifted, sensing the transformation, the subtle unraveling of arrogance into something recognizably human. Her legs stopped their restless movement, and the tremor in her hands eased slightly as if the room itself had demanded she pause and reflect. The girl who had entered the courtroom ready to flaunt her privilege now faced an internal reckoning, a confrontation with her own fragility, and the invisible but undeniable truth that the real measure of character was not wealth or influence, but the courage to admit mistakes and grow from them. Her gaze fell to the polished courtroom floor as she wrestled with the unfamiliar sensation of accountability pressing against her chest, the confident smirk she had relied upon now replaced by a flutter of uncertainty she couldn't quite hide. Caprio watched quietly, his expression calm, almost fatherly, allowing her the space to confront the fragile layers of pride and entitlement that had defined her presence in the world. "Every choice you make leaves a mark," he said softly, his voice steady. "And sometimes the hardest lessons come from realizing the mark we leave on others, not ourselves." She shifted in her seat, shoulders straightening, not with renewed arrogance, but with the subtle tension of someone beginning to see beyond her own reflection. The spectators leaned in instinctively, sensing that this was no longer a spectacle of privilege, but a real-time transformation, the kind that left hearts caught between relief, awe, and empathy. Her hands, once clenched on the edges of her chair, rested gently now, almost limply, as if she were letting go of the performance she had been maintaining. The quiet hum of the room, the soft shuffle of papers, the distant creak of the bench beneath her, all seemed to converge into a single moment of reflection. For the first time, she felt the delicate, uncomfortable tug of humility, the awareness that true power was not inherited but cultivated, that influence meant little if divorced from integrity, and that the world she had taken for granted might demand far more than she had ever expected to give. She finally lifted her eyes, meeting Caprio's gaze with something closer to honesty than she had ever shown, a flicker of vulnerability breaking through the armor of entitlement she had worn so confidently. The courtroom seemed to hold its breath, the usual whispers and stares fading into a collective focus on the transformation quietly unfolding before them. Her lips parted, but no words of defiance came. Instead, a hesitation lingered, a rare uncertainty that contrasted sharply with the arrogance she had displayed just minutes earlier. Caprio's calm presence acted as a mirror, reflecting back not the image she wanted to project, but the one she had avoided acknowledging, a young woman capable of fear, reflection, and change. Her hands rested on the table, still slightly trembling, betraying the storm of thoughts swirling beneath her composed exterior, and she realized that this courtroom was no longer a stage for her rebellion, but a place demanding self-examination. The spectators watched intently, drawn in by the subtle cracks in her persona, sensing the gravity of the internal reckoning taking place. The girl who had once believed she could command attention with status and arrogance was now beginning to understand the weight of words, actions, and choices, and the invisible lesson Caprio offered, calm, patient, and quietly firm, was reshaping her understanding of responsibility, humility, and the true measure of character. Her posture shifted again, this time subtly, as if the invisible weight of Caprio's presence pressed against her shoulders, forcing her to reconcile the person she had projected with the one she had avoided seeing. The courtroom's atmosphere, once charged with her arrogance, now hummed with quiet anticipation, every observer sensing the unfolding inner struggle. Her fingers traced the edge of the table almost unconsciously, a nervous gesture that betrayed the conflict within, a desire to maintain control colliding with an awakening sense of accountability. Caprio's voice, calm and measured, filled the space without raising tension. Acknowledging our mistakes is not weakness, it is strength. It allows us to grow, to repair, to become someone others can respect. The words penetrated her defenses, and for a brief moment, the mask of entitlement slipped, revealing the uncertainty, the fear, and the vulnerability she had worked so hard to hide. She swallowed hard, lips pressed together, fighting the urge to reclaim the arrogance that had been her armor, yet unable to ignore the unfamiliar stirrings of self-reflection rising within her. The spectators leaned in imperceptibly, sensing that this was no longer a simple confrontation, but a pivotal moment of transformation. Her legs, once restless, now rested still, and the tremor in her hands had softened, signaling that the first fragile step toward humility and understanding had begun, a quiet yet undeniable shift in a young woman who had entered the courtroom believing herself untouchable. She took a slow, deliberate breath, feeling a strange and uncomfortable awareness settle over her chest, the kind of pressure that could not be masked by designer clothes or family influence. Her eyes, once darting impatiently around the room, now lingered on Caprio, searching for judgment but finding only calm authority, a quiet insistence that demanded honesty rather than theatrics. The spectators sensed the shift immediately, their whispered curiosity replaced by a silent fascination, as if watching a fragile transformation unfold in real time. Her hands rested on the table, fingers intertwined loosely, betraying the subtle tension still lingering beneath her slowly softening exterior. Caprio's voice broke the quiet, gentle but unwavering. It is far easier to deflect blame than to face ourselves, yet courage is found in that very confrontation. She felt the weight of the words pressing against her, a mirror reflecting not the persona she wanted to project, but the one she had concealed behind entitlement and pride. Her smirk had disappeared entirely, replaced by a tentative expression that suggested fear, realization, and the first flicker of humility. The courtroom, once a stage for defiance, had become a crucible for growth, and the girl who had thought her father's influence could shield her from reality was now facing the undeniable truth: respect, integrity, and self-awareness could not be inherited, they had to be earned, one quiet, painful realization at a time. Her shoulders slumped slightly, the confident posture she had relied on for so long giving way to a tension she could no longer fully control, as if the courtroom itself were pressing her to reckon with her own flaws. Her hands rested on the table, still trembling faintly, while her eyes darted momentarily to the spectators, searching for reassurance or judgment but finding only curiosity and silent attention. Caprio's calm, steady gaze remained fixed on her, inviting her to step out of the protective cocoon of arrogance she had woven around herself. "Sometimes the hardest person to face is the one staring back at you in the mirror," he said softly, letting the words hang in the space like a gentle, guiding current. She swallowed, the lump in her throat betraying emotions she had long suppressed: fear, doubt, and an unspoken desire to be understood, not admired. The quiet intensity of the courtroom seemed to amplify every micro-expression: the twitch of her fingers, the subtle shift of her weight, the fleeting downward glance, revealing the internal struggle she could no longer hide. For the first time, she realized that privilege might have shielded her from consequence, but it could not shield her from self-awareness or accountability. Every breath felt heavier, every heartbeat louder, as the girl who had entered with arrogance now wrestled with humility, slowly learning that strength is measured not by defiance or influence, but by the courage to face oneself honestly, even under the watchful eyes of the world. Her eyes lingered on Caprio's calm, steady face, searching for a hint of mockery or impatience, but found none, only a quiet expectation that demanded she confront herself. The arrogance she had relied on as armor seemed to melt under the weight of his presence, leaving her exposed to thoughts she had long avoided: the emptiness beneath her privileges, the fragility hidden behind her confidence, and the realization that influence alone could never replace integrity. Her hands, resting on the edge of the table, twitched slightly as if resisting the inevitable introspection, while her legs remained still for the first time, the restless energy that had defined her attitude now absorbed into self-reflection. Caprio spoke again, gentle but firm. "We are all accountable for our actions, no matter our station, and true growth begins when we admit that we are capable of error." The words pressed into her consciousness, soft yet insistent, guiding her toward the uncomfortable truth she had tried to ignore. Around her, the spectators leaned forward, sensing the shift, watching a young woman's transformation unfold from arrogance to vulnerability. The room, once charged with tension and defiance, now held a fragile stillness, a quiet space for reflection and reckoning. She exhaled slowly, a mixture of relief and apprehension, realizing that the moment she had once feared, the confrontation with her own limitations, was the very moment that might define her character and reshape the way she viewed herself and the world around her. She shifted her gaze from the floor to the courtroom walls, noticing for the first time how the space, once intimidating, now felt like a place of revelation rather than judgment, the polished wood and muted tones framing her awakening. Her fingers rested lightly on the table, no longer clenched, as if the invisible weight of defiance had begun to lift, replaced by a cautious openness she had never allowed herself before. Caprio's voice broke the silence again, calm and steady. "Acknowledging our mistakes is not a defeat, it is the first step toward becoming someone worthy of respect." Each word seemed to echo inside her, pressing against the layers of pride she had spent years cultivating, revealing the cracks that had always existed beneath the surface. She swallowed, her chest tight with a mixture of fear, humility, and a strange relief, realizing that the persona she had used to shield herself from judgment was slowly dissolving. Spectators watched intently, sensing the transformation, witnessing the subtle surrender of ego in a young woman who had believed status could protect her from consequence. Her eyes met Caprio's once more, tentative and searching, no longer defiant but reflective, beginning to grasp the quiet power of honesty and personal responsibility. In that suspended moment, the courtroom became more than a place of law. It became a mirror for her soul, exposing the truths she had long avoided and setting the stage for a profound, life-altering lesson. A subtle shift in her expression betrayed the emergence of a new awareness, the once unwavering smirk replaced by a delicate tension that spoke of reflection and uncertainty. She had entered the courtroom expecting spectacle, ready to wield entitlement as her shield, but now every fiber of her being seemed focused inward, confronting emotions she had long ignored. Caprio's calm, patient gaze acted as both guide and mirror, silently encouraging her to explore the fragile spaces within herself she had kept hidden. Her hands rested loosely on the table, fingers brushing together, and for the first time, she felt the raw weight of accountability pressing gently but insistently on her conscience. The room seemed to contract and expand with her shifting perception, the spectators sensing the quiet unraveling of arrogance and the emergence of vulnerability. Caprio spoke again, soft yet deliberate. Courage is not always loud or dramatic. Sometimes it is simply facing the truth about who we are. The words seeped into her awareness, igniting a spark of understanding that the real measure of strength was not the force of influence, but the willingness to confront shortcomings, acknowledge mistakes, and grow beyond them. In that moment, the young woman began to feel the heavy yet liberating release of humility, the first steps of transformation taking root as she realized that true respect could never be bought or inherited. It had to be earned, patiently, quietly, and sincerely, even in the unforgiving light of the courtroom. Her gaze softened, lingering on Caprio with a new recognition of the calm authority he carried, a presence that demanded neither fear nor obedience but honesty and reflection. The defiance that had defined her entrance now felt like a distant echo, replaced by an awareness of the subtle but undeniable lesson unfolding before her. Her fingers rested lightly on the polished table, no longer fidgeting, as if the act of stillness itself was helping her process the weight of the moment. Caprio's voice broke the quiet, gentle yet unwavering. Accountability is not punishment, it is a gift, a chance to understand ourselves and the impact of our actions. Each word resonated within her, unraveling the last threads of entitlement she had clung to, revealing a young woman beginning to accept that privilege could never replace conscience, and influence could never replace character. The spectators leaned forward, captivated, sensing that this was more than a courtroom proceeding. It was a profound confrontation with self, a moment where personal growth was unavoidable. She exhaled slowly, feeling a mixture of relief and apprehension, realizing that the transformation she feared was in fact the first step toward empowerment, a quiet reclaiming of integrity and maturity. In that suspended instant, the courtroom had shifted from a stage of spectacle to a space of awakening, and she understood, finally, that respect, humility, and courage were lessons that could not be inherited. They had to be claimed through conscious choice and sincere reflection. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched her lips, the first genuine expression she had shown since entering the courtroom, signaling the subtle shift from defiance to reflection. She straightened slightly, shoulders still tense but no longer rigid, as if the invisible weight of her own ego had begun to lift, replaced by a cautious humility. Caprio's eyes held hers with steady patience, the calm authority of decades guiding young hearts and minds without force, letting lessons settle naturally. The spectators watched in silence, sensing the profound change, the quiet victory of introspection over pride, and the remarkable transformation of a young woman confronting the reality of accountability. Her hands rested lightly on the table, fingers relaxed, no longer seeking the false security of posture or props, as she absorbed the magnitude of the judge's words and the unspoken invitation to grow. Every nervous flicker, every subtle hesitation, had been transformed into awareness, a tangible but gentle awakening to the responsibilities that came with influence and privilege. The girl who had entered the room brimming with entitlement now recognized the fragile beauty of humility, the courage required to face one's own flaws, and the quiet power of honesty that spoke louder than arrogance ever could. In the hushed courtroom, it became clear that the lesson had been internalized, and though the day was not yet over, the invisible triumph of conscience had already been achieved, leaving spectators and participant alike with a profound sense of respect, awe, and quiet inspiration. As the proceedings neared conclusion, the young woman rose, her movements no longer marked by defiance but by careful, measured grace that revealed a newfound awareness of herself and her actions. Caprio leaned forward slightly, his gentle, fatherly eyes watching, and for the first time, she spoke clearly, not with entitlement, not with arrogance, but with quiet honesty. I understand now. I acted without thinking, and I want to do better. The courtroom, silent until that moment, seemed to exhale collectively, the spectators sensing the profound shift from self-absorption to reflection. What had begun as a display of privilege had transformed into a lesson in courage, humility, and accountability. Then, in a twist no one expected, she paused and turned briefly toward her father, whose proud yet humbled expression mirrored the gravity of the moment, silently acknowledging that influence was never a substitute for character. Caprio nodded softly, his voice calm but filled with quiet authority. Respect, integrity, and responsibility are not given, they are earned, often in the smallest moments when we face ourselves honestly. In that instant, the girl realized the true power of accountability. It could humble, teach, and transform, and the courtroom had become more than a stage for judgment, it had become a mirror for the soul. Privilege could no longer shield her, but reflection, courage, and humility could, and in learning that lesson she had discovered a strength greater than arrogance, leaving the room, the spectators, and even her father with a moment of awe, quiet inspiration, and undeniable respect for the person she was beginning to become. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and let us know in the comments where you're watching us from.